Will that be Cabriolet or Coupe A? That's this week on Motoring 2001.
TSN's Motoring 2001 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas. Keep a good thing going. Go Midas.
You know, BMW likes to think of their cars as the ultimate driving experience, and there are a few that would disagree. And there are also a few that would disagree that the M3 could be the ultimate sports car. And this week we're going to check out the new 2001 M3 Coupe, as well as this convertible, the first M3 soft top ever available in Canada. Well, they call it a cabriolet, which I think kind of denotes it as a girl's car, you know, like the Volkswagen Cabriolet. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we'll talk more about that later on. But first, speaking of BMW, they recently introduced a unique driver's training program to North America. Now, I say unique because you don't have to live close to the school to attend. It comes to you. It's mobile. Well, recently, they hosted what could be their toughest group of pupils. I mean, when it comes to driving, these men and women figure they know it all. Attention, go!
There's a real art to losing control of a vehicle for the purpose of regaining it.
But do we ever look at the emotional level, the stress level? People being in a bad mood or too harried to get somewhere. Attitude. And thirdly, awareness. Are you aware when you're at the wheel, or are you in the Bahamas? So it's important to address
BMW had taken its traveling driver's school to Blainville, Quebec, north of Montreal. Instructor Pierre Savoy knew he had his work cut out for him. I mean, how do you teach a group of automotive journalists, including our own Jim Kenzie, the art of driving?
People who are automotive journalists and who review cars generally know how to drive to a certain extent, but most of them are very open to learning new techniques. And because I've been working with most of them for quite a few years, and I've established a reputation at racing schools for the past few years, I generally have facility, if we say, to teach them new things.
Release the brakes.
A car is a marvel of technology, but really it's pretty dense. If you park it on the side of the road for 10 years, it's not going to move. It's not going to go out of control. It's not going to crash. It's not going to roll over. Put a human being between the steering wheel and the seat, and marvelous things can happen.
It actually began way back in Munich in '76. So there's no shortage of history with BMW driver training, and we've taken a lot of that expertise and knowledge over those years and put it into our programs, if somewhat customised. And so we offer a fleet of BMW 330CR coupes, 11 of them to be exact, and it's experiencing them through the exercises we put these students through that they can understand and fully appreciate the technology built into the car.
With BMW now involved in Formula One racing, it wasn't going to miss a perfect photo op. And so who should appear but none other than F1 BMW Williams driver Ralf Schumacher. Now, I noticed he didn't drive and wondered if that had something to do with North American drivers.
Well, it's all a bit slower, obviously. I mean, since in especially Germany, you have the Autobahn, which is a non-speed limit, people do drive a lot faster and a lot better as well. I mean, here sometimes get the opinion people start sleeping on the road and therefore not taking really care of what's happening in the traffic, and sometimes you get a lot of accidents from that. I think everybody who wants really to have his car in his hands and have the power over the car, you should do such a training like that. It's the only way of learning it. It's the same for me. I mean, there's a lot of exercises here which are difficult to handle for me.
He's only saying that because we're on camera. I've taken a few driving courses before, although you might not know from seeing me out there. But I guess what's interesting is when you have to do things like make an all-wheel drive car with dynamic stability control, oversteer. That's kind of an interesting trick. Used to doing it in my old rear-wheel drive Corolla GTS, but to try to get the car to do it. And also the idea of trying to create mistakes in order that you can correct them. That, it shows you that driving really does take a level of skill, and you want to get the driver up to the level of the equipment.
Hope to sell a few cars?
Of course, always. I think it's not a hard sell, and it's not the idea of the program, to be quite honest. Our cars, we're lucky enough that our cars sell themselves if people have a drive, and if that's the case, then that's a great spin-off. But at the end of the day, as I said, it's the quality of the program that matters to us.
The way of having less accidents is not reducing the speed limit, is doing things like that, and having drivers better prepared before they get their permission.
We're rolling.
Ralph Schumacher and mud baths? What's he on about now, Martha? That's coming up later on Kenzie's Corner.
When Ford introduced the Escape and brought it in, size-wise, it was very close to the existing Explorer, but it was much cheaper. That was a signal they had to move the Explorer up market, and that they've done. On this edition of Test Drive, we look at the 2002 Ford Explorer, a vehicle they hope will keep them atop the SUV sales chart. Since its introduction in 1990 as a 91 model, each successive generation of Explorer has grown, not only in size but also in stature. The first model set the trend, the rest followed, building a legion of fans. However, then came the Firestone tyre problem, one that put a noticeable blip in the sales chart. However, with the new Explorer, Ford is out to correct that very large hiccup. At one time you had to have a solid rear axle under the back end of your SUV, a myth propagated mainly by Jeep and Land Rover. Ford, however, has bucked the trend, and what they've done is put in a fully independent rear suspension. It allows you to play around in this environment quite well, but out on the open road it adds a great deal to the stability of the vehicle. Add that nice new suspension to a body that's an unbelievable 350% stiffer than the previous Explorer, and well, you've got one vehicle that handles itself quite well. The fully independent suspension, which features double wishbones, coilover shocks and front and rear stabilizer bars, is mounted to a tough body-on-frame design. Through the pylons, the large and heavy nature of the Explorer showed up in the form of moderate understeer. However, considering the high centre of gravity, the amount of body roll is well within acceptable limits. In short, the on-road dynamic demeanour surprised me. Off-road, the design soaks up large potholes while doing a good job of keeping the wheels on the ground. The Explorer really does live up to its utility part of the nameplate, primarily because you've got a third seat. That allows you to accommodate 7 people. Fold it flat, you've now got 46 cubic feet of cargo space. Fold the centre seats forward and that number grows to 88 cubic feet. But there is a problem. The whole lot runs downhill towards the back bumper, and that's because they had to raise the centre to provide some leg room for that third seat. So what happens? You go to the grocery store, some of the groceries escape, you open the tailgate, and guess what? You're running down the road after that errant orange. Well, Ford actually did think about that, because primarily this thing is deceiving. There's the window line, but they've actually cut the tailgate down low enough that it's about the right height for the average shopping cart. That allows you to reach in and grab your groceries very easily. Now you're not the idiot running down the road after that errant orange. Powering the Explorer is a strong single overhead cam 4-litre engine that's married to a 5-speed automatic transmission and a fully automatic 4-wheel drive system that includes a low-range gear set. A healthy 210 horsepower and 250 pounds-feet of torque motivates the Explorer from rest to 100 kilometers an hour in about 10.5 seconds, while the riskier passing move
Well, it clocks in at a speedy 7.5 seconds. Loading the vehicle to capacity does slow the proceedings slightly. However, only those with a small house to haul around on a regular basis need contemplate the optional 4.6-litre V8. You know, the rework to the interior of this new Explorer has been done very well. First of all, they stuck an extra 2 inches in the wheelbase. That gives you a lot more space behind the front passengers. But more importantly, the truck is now 2.5 inches wider. With the old version, you used to sit cheek to jowl with your passenger. Now with that extra space, well, it's abundant. The other thing they've done particularly well is the center console. They've taken the vents out and moved the radio all the way to the top. Then you get the vents, but placing them here does not sacrifice efficiency. Below them, you've got the climate controls. In short, it's one of the more logical layouts in the industry. The XLT model tested also brings all the usual power items, a comprehensive gauge cluster, steering wheel mounted cruise functions and leather seating. From a safety perspective, the Explorer rates well, getting kinda dual stage airbags. Depending upon the crash severity, they either partially deploy or go all the way to protect the front seat riders. Adjustable pedals and side curtain airbags are worthwhile options. If you happen to be unlucky enough to run into the new Explorer, you'll appreciate the lowered bumpers. Dropping them by some 2.5 inches mean they now line up with the bumper of the average car. You know, there's no question that the Firestone tyre problem hurt the previous Explorer enormously. This new vehicle, on the other hand, well, it comes with a set of Michelins. That fact is painted loud and proud all over the sidewalls. For those in the market for a good SUV, take a look at this Explorer. It's good enough that it's going to retain Ford's crown as a top-selling SUV quite handily.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns the appearance of your vehicle. You know, there's not too many fasteners visible on the outside of a modern vehicle. The most obvious ones being the ones that affix the license plate to the vehicle. You know, it's a pet peeve of mine when I see a vehicle 2 or 3 years old going down the road that's in great shape, but I see rust just leaching out of those rusty license plate screws. And you know, the dealers use the cheapest screws they can get to put that license plate on because good ones cost money. Now, if you don't want that unsightly mess on your vehicle, go to the auto parts store or the dealership and pay a couple of extra bucks to get stainless steel screws. You'll never have this rusting problem. With stainless steel, it's almost immune to corrosion. They'll last the life of the vehicle. And matter of fact, they'll outlast the vehicle. When you trade it in and get your next one, take those stainless steel screws back out and put them on the next vehicle. They'll last virtually forever. That's your Midas tip of the week.
From an image standpoint, BMW's image is predicated on sportiness and luxury, and this one has both in spades, absolutely. I mean, it costs a lot, and that's my one consideration with this. The Cabrio will get you over 90,000 bucks once you load it all up with options. But it really does have the performance. It has amazing rigidity for a cabriolet, for a convertible.
Personally, if you've got a very fast, very powerful, very good handling car, to turn it into a convertible, it's just not my cup of tea. I would never buy that. If I were buying a convertible, it wouldn't have to be a car that's this quick or this fast.
They don't call it a convertible, they call it a cabriolet. Doesn't that denote a girl's car?
Well, it can because of the Volkswagen Association, but this isn't a girl's car, though I'm sure women will love it. I mean, this is a real high zoot car. I just finished getting out of the Corvette convertible, for instance, and that car I would recommend a automatic transmission in because it's more Gran Turismo than pure sporting. That's left to the Corvette Z06. But this thing can be a pure sports car and deserves to have that 6-speed manual transmission. It deserves to be bought by people who are going to flog it about because it can handle it and just happens to not have a roof.
Okay, we've got the M3 Coupe and Cabriolet side by each here, and I want you to check out the trunk in the Coupe. As you can see, there is ample space for plenty of luggage. But you come on over to the Cabriolet, and the problem is obvious. This area is where they store the soft top when it's down, but when it's up, BMW has come up with this nifty lever. Push it like this, problem is solved. But wait a minute, if you're buying a convertible, you're buying it to enjoy it with the top down. Now the base price on the cab is $80,000. The coupe, $70,000. You're losing about 40% of your luggage space. It's easy. Go to your local dealer and say, hey, how about 40% off the price? Fat chance, I know. All right, let's head to the Quaker State Garage and join Bill Gardner.
Brad, $70,000 or $80,000 for a car is a lot of money in my books, and I'll tell you, some of the repair bills that I'm handing out lately for repairing 8- and 10-year-old cars are shocking to me. I just can't believe how expensive it is these days to maintain a car. But if you've got a car that's viable and still running well, and you have to make repairs on it, you're faced with some big bills sometimes. It's just the way it is. Now, here's an example of what would seem like a pretty minor repair on a car that can get kind of expensive. And I'm talking about the fuel lines that are underneath the body of your car. Now, any car with fuel injection, which is just about every car built in about the last 15 model years, has got lines just like these ones running underneath the body. Now, in older cars with carburetors, the fuel pump used to be up on the engine, and it actually sucked the fuel along these lines. It drew a little bit of a vacuum on these lines and pulled the fuel from the tank up to the engine. On a modern car with fuel injection, however, the pump is back in the tank and it pressurizes these lines with 35 to 40 psi, and on some cars 55 to 65 psi of fuel pressure in these lines. Now, when they get as rusty as these ones that you see right here, all it takes is a little bump or a stone to come up, or a mechanic to work on them and have to service them and decouple them from a fuel filter, fuel pump, or fuel tank assembly, and all of a sudden these rusty lines are leaking and needing to be replaced. Now, these lines are pretty expensive to buy from the dealer. There's different ways you can go about repairing them or replacing them. You can buy sections of aftermarket line to piece in one bad section, and sometimes you get lucky and the rust damage is confined to one area, you can just piece it in. But if you have to replace the whole works, pretty expensive part and quite a bit of labor. Now let's go over to the hoist and have a look at where these lines are in the car and just how well they can be protected. If you have your car rust-proofed, you're going to see how well they can stand up if they're taken care of. Those terribly rusted fuel lines that you saw me holding just a second ago came off 88 and 89 model vehicles we serviced in the past couple of weeks. Now, if you look underneath this 88 Pontiac on the hoist, you can see components that are significantly rusted. This amount of rust, however, isn't critical right here. You can see the fuel tank, however, it doesn't show any rust. It's got a bit of undercoating on it. And when I move up here to the fuel lines, the lines that I was just holding a minute ago off those other cars, you can see that on this car, on this 88 car, they look almost like new. And the reason they almost look like new is that at the dealership, when this car was first sold, the original owner had it rust-proofed or undercoated, and you can see as I scrape these lines with my thumbnail, there's a little bit of tar on those lines, and that's the difference between those heavily rusted lines that we saw and these ones here that are still intact. Now, depending on how extensive the rust is and the location of it, you may be able to replace just one short section of fuel line if you're lucky. And in that case, you can go to an auto parts store and get a piece of tubing just like this that has the special end on it with the Viton O-ring and the threaded fitting that you need for the appropriate car. Now, every car has different types of fittings, and there's a lot of different repair lines now available. One like this could run you $15 to $25 depending on diameter and length. But it's something that is a little bit harder to work with because you've got to take a tube bender and put all the appropriate shapes in the tube to get it tucked up underneath the car, so your labor costs are a little bit higher. Now, if you have to replace the entire section of fuel tubing right from the tank up to the engine, you might be buying a part like this right from the dealer. Now, this is an easy way for a mechanic to tackle the job because, as you can see, it's already pre-bent and it's got the hose fittings that you need to connect it right up. It makes life easier on the labor side, but it's expensive parts-wise. This one we just ordered the other day for a customer's pickup truck. As you can see, it's as tall as I am, so it's 6 feet long. $169 for this particular part. And remember that there's a supply and a return, so there's two parts involved, roughly the same price. You factor in some labor and a little bit of shop material, and you've got yourself a pretty expensive repair job. So think about that rust proofing, and if you didn't have it done at the dealership or when you first bought the car, if the car's still in good shape and only 3 or 4 years old, it's not too late to get it underneath there to save an expensive repair like we just talked about. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 2001.
Formula One star Ralph Schumacher and I really don't have much in common, including our ability to negotiate an automobile slalom course. You see, I get through clean and Ralph punched out a couple of cones, but I have to admit I was pushing him pretty hard. Now, Ralph said, interestingly enough, that he has never taken a driver training program like the one that BMW is offering across the country. I have taken lots of these programs, but then again, I've never driven a Formula One car, so I'm not entirely sure what that proves. But the course that BMW is offering, one thing I can tell you about it for a fact is they are subsidizing it to a huge degree. The cost that you pay for this program, nowhere near what it costs BMW to run. Why? Because BMW understands that people just aren't prepared to pay what it costs to learn to be a better driver. Most people think, I've got my license, what else do I have to learn? A lot. If you ever take a program like this, you'll find out how much you have to learn. I've taken or given one of these programs at least once a year for 15 years. I've never failed to learn something brand new every time. We ran a program for a group of women a few years ago. They had more fun in these cars. They were throwing them sideways. They learned how to drive, how to put their hands on the wheel correctly, how to buckle their seatbelts up. They said they learned a lot and had a great time doing it. We asked them, well, how much would you pay for a program like this? They said, oh, maybe $150. $150. That wouldn't come close to covering the cost of an event like this. They'd gladly spend $800 on a golf weekend to learn how to improve their swing, or $600 getting their faces plastered with mud, or sitting in a kelp bath. But for something that might actually save their lives, or at least save them a couple of $1,000s in car insurance, they're not interested. I don't get it. Why can't people see the dollar value that driver training can give to them? So folks, men or women, I don't care whether you take the BMW program or some other program, learn how to drive. And remember, speaking of driving, next time you're on the golf course, if you shank your drive, it ain't gonna kill you. I'm Jim Kenzie.
BMW is going to import about 350 M3s, 40% of which will be the soft top. Now the good news is the cars are now available. The bad news, the last time we checked, they're all sold out. But you know what, and don't quote me, but if you've got $70,000 to $85,000 burning a hole in your pocket, I'll bet you there's a dealer somewhere who'd like to make you a satisfied customer. That's it for now. We'll see you next time out as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
TSN's Motoring 2001 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas. Keep a good thing going. Go Midas.